Hello, welcome into another episode of Gorilla Sports Off Ice, brought to you by our great friends over at Trusted American Mortgage. Trusted American salary-based mortgage consultants want to help you get into a better interest rate and lower your monthly payment. Go to trustedamerican.com and see how much money they can save you today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Hello, welcome in. Gorilla Sports Off Ice, Jesse Montano, Meghan Angley. Meghan, we made it. It's halfway. We have made it to the halfway mark. This may be the quickest halfway point that it's felt to me in my media career. Can't believe we're here. How are you doing today, Meghan?
Doing really good. I've got a good feeling about the game tonight, and it does feel like an important moment for the team to cap off that first half of the season on a high note against a strong team.
My whole life, I've never been able to hear someone say high note without thinking Dan high note. I think it's an interesting point of, can you hit that official? Because tonight will be game 41 for the Colorado Avalanche. Can they hit, like you said, a high water mark on that official halfway point of the season, taking on the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers? We're going to preview that tonight, or we're going to preview for tonight. Meghan and I will both be there, bringing you guys everything post-game. But Meghan, I do want to talk about what we've seen. This has been a crazy schedule, unbelievably compact grouping of games through the first 41. We've seen a lot of injuries. We've seen a lot of NHL debuts, a lot of forwards used, a lot of goalies used. There has been a lot that has already happened in maybe this is the last day that we can say this young season, because once we get beyond the halfway mark, you are moving into home stretch type territory. We're in 2025. So suddenly we're talking, trade deadline isn't all that far out. We're talking more weeks than months on something like that. We have the Four Nations break about a month from today. And coming out of that, it's a dead sprint to the finish. You are entering into the time of year where we're looking at standings and points and games in hand. We are, after tonight, you are officially into that territory where it is no longer early in the year. There's no longer runway to make things up. We are into it. So I guess let me ask you the most broad version of the question. Your overall thoughts on the first half of the NHL season for the Avs so far.
I feel really good about where this team is at. They have faced a lot of adversity from before the regular season start date in October. Even ahead of camp, we knew they'd be without Artturi Lehkonen. Obviously, Gabe Landeskog, questions loomed around him. Val Nichushkin, it was even a question then if he would return from suspension and the team would have interest in utilizing him, and would the team embrace him? And so all of those unknowns that existed even before the season started, I want to take a second to revisit that only briefly because of how far this team has come. They get Artturi Lehkonen back in the lineup. He's able to make an impact, especially here lately in some of these recent games in this past 10-game stretch. Val Nichushkin, though injured right now, and it thankfully doesn't seem to be serious, also didn't seem like he'd missed a beat. He was not only embraced by his teammates, but he seemed to get up to game speed very quickly despite not having played hockey for 6 months. Those were a lot of unknowns that could have gone a very different direction for this team. And so I'm feeling a sense of gratitude that they weathered the hailstorm and the tornado and the floods. Like, it just felt like every natural disaster this team could have faced, they experienced, because it has been a carousel of injuries at every point. And for them to be where they're at in the standings, in the Central Division, battling to move up, the Minnesota Wild had the success that they did to start the year, but I think the Avs are gunning for a second, third place spot in the Central very realistically, despite continuing to have some injuries, Scott Wedgwood, of course, being one of them. And what I like too is that the front office has decided to address some of the team's needs prior to the deadline. I think it says a lot about how they feel about what this team can do in the back half of this season, and they want to get them as prepared for it as possible. I don't doubt too that they're going to be looking at the deadline in ways to get better, but they're not resting on their laurels despite having some challenges early in this season. And I feel a lot of pride. I know that's probably unsurprising. I feel a lot of pride for how they've been able to weather the storm early on and also show some strength during some weak moments as a team.
So I'm going to go through a couple of things that you talked about there. And just again, because they do tell the story of the season so far. And I want to start with Val Nichushkin because that dominated a lot of not just our off-season airwaves, but I think for a lot of hockey shows. Again, not specific to Colorado,
right?
Even. What's going to happen? When is he going to be reinstated? Do the Avs want to keep him? How will he be embraced? You can kind of just keep going down the list. There were so many question marks around it. And to your point, Megan, it feels to me, given the backstory, given all the conversation around it, given the lead up, it feels like that went about as good as it could have.
Yeah, because when you look at the alternatives that existed very realistically for the Val Nichushkin situation, this could have been a much more difficult room for the Avs to be in. And it's hard to replace a top 6 player like Val Nichushkin. The Avs are seeing that in the absence of Duren for a lot of this season, a player that they expected to be an option there. And I think not having a Val Nichushkin there as an option too could have been devastating to this team.
Yeah. I mean, it would have completely changed the course of what you were expecting out of this group this year. And it would have thrown another, let's even say you went out and used the money, let's say he doesn't come back and use that money somewhere else. Well, is that player as good as Val Nichushkin? Are you look for the quality of player that Val Nichushkin is? They have him on a discount. Now you could definitely make the argument that given the issues and the availability problems, maybe it's not that much of a discount. But when Val Nichushkin's playing at his best, he's more than a $6 whatever million player. Would the player that they would have gone out, would he have replicated what Val does? Would he have brought the intangibles that Val Nichushkin brings, et cetera, et cetera? So yeah, it could have completely changed the course of things. I was asked a question on, I did a hit in Montreal before the game on Saturday, and I was asked what the difference is in the team now versus what we saw at the beginning of the season. And they weren't asking in terms of personnel. And I said, Megan, that I felt that the team rightfully had different expectations at the start of the year that were kind of affording the some graces for what the group was going through. And I think that page has been turned. I think Jared Bednar has kind of said, we gave ourselves a lower bar given everything that was happening, but our expectation is back up to where it's at. Would you agree with that the expectations for this group have shifted back into top of the division, Stanley Cup contender, et cetera, et cetera? As we're at the beginning, it was keep our head above water.
I think if they're being honest, yes. I think most players and coach would say that was always the expectation, even when they were down bodies. But I think just stringing together some wins and trying to find their identity is the answer you'd get in being asked about how they started the year. But I do believe they've had Stanley Cup aspirations from game one. There were just some realities they had to absorb around the execution and how possible that might be. And I think, though, having that ambition, having your sights set on chasing down, a top spot in the Central Division and Stanley Cup aspirations, I think those are important to have from game 1 to get to game 41 and survive the injuries the way that they did. And so I think they had to have forward future thinking from the beginning, because if they dwelled too much on their present circumstance, it could overcome them in a bad way, because there was so much they just couldn't change. And so I think it's maybe shifted a little bit, but I actually imagine they had their sights set pretty high from the jump. Um, and they're probably on the wrong team if they were thinking too much about just managing expectations because they're down a few bodies. I think that's why this is the Colorado Avalanche team that we enjoy covering so much. They're wired a little different, and they have a mentality of champions.
The other thing that we've seen this year, and it's one of the things that I think, if I'm the Avalanche, I'm taking the most pride in from this first half of the season is, and correct me on this number, 9 NHL debuts. And the amount of forwards they've used is in the high 20s. This is a team that, go look at any prospect pipeline ranking, is near the bottom. The general consensus around this group is that they don't have any players that can come up through the system and contribute at the NHL level. Look, none of these guys, well, I shouldn't say none. The majority of these guys that they've called up, you're not expecting to turn into NHL top 6 staples. But what they have been able to pull out of the organization this year and get quality NHL minutes from young players looking to break through and take that next step, I think the Avs have maybe put the rest of the league and a little bit themselves on notice of, hey, it is not all doom and gloom down in the American Hockey League and beyond. There are some players here that, again, not only are trade assets, but yeah, we can pull them into the lineup and they can contribute in meaningful ways for more than one game at a time. That's one thing that I think has maybe been the most eye-opening for me this season.
I think for me, having covered a lot of the prospects over the last several seasons, the biggest shift I've seen has been how much front office to American League coaching staff has embraced the Avs needs very specifically and molding what players are to the Avs needs right now. I think in the past, you look at a prospect and you see what they do well, and you want to lean into that, pour into the parts of their game that were already strong. And I think the shift has moved more so towards building things into their game that make them more dimensional to better contribute in the immediate for the Avs needs. And as a result, I think that they're bringing in players, whether it be, through drafting or, as we've seen more recently, through dipping into college free agency and kids who may have aged out of the draft, like an Ivan getting a development camp invite, even like a Ty Felleber who's been bouncing around the pro ranks for a little bit now, but not in the Avs AHL organization. And they're finding ways to turn these players into viable options because they kind of already have some of the things that the Avs need, and they're just strengthening that. And that's why I think we see an Oscar Olausson only get 2 games before being reassigned, and they're giving another player a look. And it's not to point to a failure, because you look at the success of an Ivan, and more importantly, the success early of a Nikolai Kovalenko and being able to turn that into a Mackenzie Blackwood. Obviously, that's a very simplified version of that, but it's important. Nikolai Kovalenko panning out even a little bit in his first regular season NHL is important in getting Mackenzie Blackwood and helping to resolve a huge goaltending issue. And so it's that, and it's Ivan being able to contribute on a nightly basis sooner than anybody expected. But even the early returns of Nikita Prishepov, who is still very raw, but you have so much hope then and what this player can become because of how well he fit so early into his NHL career. I could go on the prospect pipeline, but I think everybody gets the gist that it does feel different this year. It's a mix, too, of the young players like the Ivans, as well as, they bring in Yuri Anala, and they're finding some use for him. Chris Wagner earns an extension in the organization, and
Keaton Middleton
following the Andreas Englund pipeline, which resulted in Jack Johnson at the end of the day. At this rate, though, I think they have use for Keaton Middleton right now, so there's no need to necessarily turn that into a trade the same way. They've got this homegrown, stay-at-home defenseman who's mean to play against, and he makes a lot of sense in the lineup right now. And that's somebody that that snuck up on a lot of people because he's been in the organization now for a while and just wasn't seriously considered an option. But I think he's refined his game to be so much more responsible and trusted, especially under the coaching of Schneekloth, to be that for the Avs now.
There's been so many players that you just named who to your point, were not just one game call up, 4 minutes at the bottom of the lineup, and then back to the Eagles. I mean, we've seen top six, Ivan, power play one, and granted, a lot of that was born out of necessity, but it's the fact that these were players that Jared Bednar said, not only do I feel comfortable trying them there, they're doing their job and they're working hard and they're driving results. And I do also want to point out, because this is something that I feel like a lot of fans out there criticize, something like Kovalenko. Nikolai Kovalenko is a resounding success story for the Avalanche. Like, people look at the fact that, the Avs trade players like that. And I think a lot about Justin Barron a few years ago. And granted, that's the ultimate example because of how important the returning piece went on to be. But no, if you don't have a quality prospect, if you haven't allowed Justin Barron to show what he's capable of, well, you don't get a player in return. So having Kovalenko come into the season, to your point, Megan, have a successful start to the year, show flashes that he can be a full-time fit in the NHL, allowed a team like the San Jose Sharks to say, yes, that's a player that we're interested in and willing to give up a quality number one starter in exchange for. That is Nikolai Kovalenko working out well, in Denver. That is not a bad thing that the Avs moved on from him to bring in an important piece.
Even a Justus Saarinen, who another that I think his timeline was 1 year too soon, and again, born from bad circumstance. I don't think that was the Avs' plan for him. They turned Justus Saarinen having a kind of rough season. He had bursts of greatness and kind of took the starting job from Georgiev there for a second, but then he had some inconsistencies, right? You still turn that into Scott Wedgwood, who, though injured right now, holy cow, has he helped to completely flip the attitude around goaltending in Colorado, alongside now Mackenzie Blackwood, of course. But turning Justus Saarinen into Scott Wedgwood also counts. And to your point, you have to have the prospects accumulate some value in order to get that kind of return. Look, there's a reason Oscar Olausson hasn't been moved, guys.
Right.
I know there's always been Vancouver could have interest in him. It's not happening. He's going to be a complimentary piece, if at all, that one day, but it's not going to be the thing that gets a Scott Wedgwood or Mackenzie Blackwood over the finish line at this point. But they have other assets that they've been able to leverage that you can part ways with, and it makes sense.
Well, because how many years, how many months have we heard the cupboard's bare? There's nothing left. There's nothing left that the Avs can do. And they just keep turning out American League players into NHL contributors, whether it be through development or through trades. So I'm over the cupboard is bare conversation.
You better believe if the Avs had any interest in moving Sam Malinsky, they would get a good return.
Yeah.
I don't like to speak that out loud, but what Sam Malinsky has become has even separated how we talk about prospects and development, because he's sort of moved into this other tier where I think he has second pair defenseman upside in the NHL in his future that he's still working through to fully realize. But the Avs really struck gold with that one. And a Cal Ritchie just hanging around as well. There's a reason those names we're not mentioning, because they're kind of untouchables, at least for right now.
Well, and again, Sam Malinsky is just, and as we're going through all of this conversation, where I'm ultimately driving at, one thing that I think we can take away from the first half of this season is, all right, maybe this organization's better at development than they get credit for.
I think so. And I think there's been a shift. I think that Chris McFarland has handpicked the people involved in a lot of these changes in philosophy that we're seeing. And we're starting to see the returns on investment too, because some of it has taken time. Schneekloth is a development prospect of his own, right? In coaching behind the Eagles bench now for several seasons, moving to the head coach position, that's a prospect as
No,
well in different ways. But in terms of
You're right.
executing their development philosophy, and this is not pointed at Cronin, who I think laid a lot of that foundation too,
Mhm,
but I just
mhm.
think that there is a shift in how they are developing and how they're approaching that as an organization.
The other thing I just want to, quick side note, you mentioned Justus Annunen. What's so interesting to me about him is it truly shows how fine the line is at this level. In the last 6 months, Megan, there have been 2 separate moments where, in my opinion, Justus Annunen had a chance to grab the net and make it his, not just on a short-term basis, but for an extended run. The first was game 2 of the Winnipeg series. You can't fault him for that one because he was sick. And hey, Alexander Georgiev comes out, snatches the net back, plays great. Maybe he's the Avs MVP the rest of the way. But that's a moment where Justus Annunen had a really strong finish to the regular season. There was shaky confidence in Alexander Georgiev, and he stumbled hard. And had Justus Annunen been healthy, I've looked at that as a moment where he could have come in, and had he won a game 2, could have potentially shortcutted his way to an NHL starting job. Then this year, he strung 3 consecutive strong games together. And Alexander Georgiev went back in for 2. Struggled. Wasn't bad, struggled. Wasn't what you wanted number 1. And that first game, the next game that Justus Annunen, because I believe Kakinen got a start, and then Annunen got a start in some order like that. And I thought that was Annunen's moment where he could have come out, and had he played a starter's game, I think we would have officially tipped the conversation to he's 1A. What happens from here? And he just never got back on track. He played 3 good games, had to sit for about a week, and never found it again. And now he's in a situation in Nashville where he's going to have to play exceptionally well to get traded out of there to get a look as a starter somewhere else. Because unfortunately for Justus, he is not going to unseat UC Saros. They just traded Yaroslav Askarov, saying Saros is our guy.
I think the situation was not the best thing for Justus Annunen in the end. He was only ever supposed to be considered for a backup role in being eased into the NHL full-time in that sense, before ever having conversations about becoming a starter. It's really Georgiev falling apart at the seams that even prompts that conversation in the first place.
Yep, you're totally right.
And what's tough about it too is I think Annunen would have gotten his game back in time. The trouble is he's trying to prove that he's even an NHL backup. And a good NHL backup can be good when called upon because you don't get the benefit of rhythm. You don't get the benefit of consecutive starts throughout the course of a year. That's the role of a backup. So you need to be good when called upon. Because Justus Annunen struggled with that consistency, it didn't even solidly put him in the backup conversation. I still think he has that upside, but that is what the Avs needed from him at minimum, and they were begging for him to be even more, but he couldn't even fulfill the backup duty, and they needed it right now and quick. And so with Annunen, again, I think rushed a year in his development, will probably still become that in the NHL. Through an organization like Nashville, where they have a solid starter who's not falling apart at the seams. And so when called upon, it's a little more predictable and the expectation is so much clearer. I think it makes so much more sense for Justus. And I don't view his time and how it finished as a failure for Colorado, especially this positive spin of, and it resulted in a Scott Wedgwood, which fits the team's needs way better right now. And there's still a future for Annunen in the NHL, but he should not have been in starter conversations this year. He probably shouldn't have even been in backup conversations. The Francouz contract, as we've talked about on past shows, was supposed to be through this year. And based upon how last year went when he had such a good training camp, got hurt, they get Prosvetov. I think that said a lot about their trust in Annunen and where he was at in his development, that they felt he was a little bit a ways off from being in that conversation as a backup. And so all of that points to it wasn't Annunen's time here in Colorado.
Well, and I'll take that and I didn't mean for us to take time talking about Annunen, but I do think it's interesting conversation how it ties into the prospect stuff. So I had a conversation with someone last year about exactly what you're talking about with the good training camp, but being reassigned, Prosvetov, all that. And they were saying like, people took that reassignment of Annunen as that the Avs didn't have faith in him. And I was told, no, it's the exact opposite, is that we think he's going to be really good and he's just not there yet. And he needs more time. And he needs to be playing and he needs to be seeing as many pucks as possible. That was why they sent him back down. And then eventually it got to the point where last year they felt it was untenable with Prosvetov, which you and I have both said, I didn't see it that way, but hey,
I liked him. Yeah.
I'm not an NHL coach or GM, and you guys have a good handle on it. But they got to the point where they said, okay, this doesn't work with Prosy. They brought Annunen back up, but I agree with you. The conversation that I had last year really did lead me to believe of like, oh, he's just not ready.
Yeah,
this is a long development.
They have a plan for him,
right?
Exactly, and he was always part of the future plan. Things just really fell apart in ways out of his control.
And I do wonder / worry about, did he just accidentally become a career backup? You know what I mean? Like, I think he needs to play. Like, I think he needs to play more, start games a lot. And I do wonder if he just accidentally signed himself up to be will spend many years in the league. But UC Saros likes to play a lot. What is Annunen going to be able to prove with a shaky up and down track record in Colorado and what will likely end up being limited minutes elsewhere?
I mean, Georgiev turned his track record in New York into a starting job in Colorado.
You're totally right.
You know what?
You are totally right.
Don't write him off.
Oh, man. Just going through some of the comments here. We do have a super chat from Zachary Walker. Is there a better pregame snack than nachos? No. Now, depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking like pregame meal, or are you just saying getting geared up for a game? Do you have a go-to couch salty snack?
I usually go for chips because it's easy. Like if I had nachos as an option, that would be a fantastic
There's
choice.
Our super chat lighting. There it is. I knew it was coming somewhere. I saw them figuring it out back there.
And I don't know if you can see this, but it's their first super on a live stream. So so welcome, Zach.
Welcome, Zach.
Thank you.
All right. We love it. Absolutely love it. Had to get the super chat lights in there for you. Sorry. So are you nachos? You got a lot of moving parts.
I would like a lot of moving parts. I'd like a little sour cream. I'd like a little jalapeno.
That's
olives.
What you're saying. You're saying if you're doing nachos, you're dressing them up.
Yes.
Right.
And I don't regularly have nachos just because there is a lot involved.
Yeah.
Usually just a bag of chips as the salty snack.
I do like a nice arena nachos with cheese. I'm a big, I like some nachos with cheese. What's your go-to chip?
I like salt and vinegar.
Oh, boo. I know I'm in the minority on that, but salt and vinegar chips upset me so much because they look like regular chips and then you get a mouthful of vinegar and it's just so gross. Plain Ruffles. Those are just my, I could eat them till I puke.
And you say plain, so do you like a dip with it? Because I know those are the best chip for a French onion dip.
I mean, what I actually like about them is that's a versatile chip. I've dipped plain Ruffles in, what did you say? The sour cream.
Yeah, French onion. There's sour cream.
The French onion dip, the sour cream. You dip them in salsa. I've dipped those in queso before. The original just salted Ruffle is a you can put it with pretty much anything. Abby had nachos yesterday. Bagley wants all the queso. Lay's classic, just a little bit too thin of a chip for me. I'll eat them. I'll eat them all the live long day. Just a little bit too
That's
thin.
why I like the kettle cooked, is because it's like the
Yes.
Lay's classic, but a little bit thicker.
Yep. Cheddar ruffles. I do like the
I like
cheddar,
those too.
cheddar and sour cream. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Anything else? Any other large takeaways from the first half of the season? Obviously, we could do an entire show talking about what we've seen from Nathan McKinnon. I mean, right now seems to be in the driver's seat of another Hart Trophy season. Cale Makar seems to have found his groove again. Mikko Rantanen is scoring goals at well over a 50-goal pace. There's a lot that we get into in terms of what those guys have done in the first half. And maybe we will park a whole show at some point in the next week or so to just review that stuff.
Yeah.
Anything else, broad strokes from the first 41 here? I guess first 40, 41 is tonight.
You know, it feels like coming out of the first 41, there's only one real line that I feel is going to remain intact. And it's the Parker Kelly OC Kiviranta line. And that's just because I don't think Jared Bednar has figured out what he likes in the top six just yet. And that really is dependent on the second line and the return of Val Nichushkin, hopefully soon too, that I think we get some different looks up there. And so that third line, it's interesting to me that of all the constants or things I could count on going into the back half of the season, that's not what I would have put money on.
I did lie. I want to talk about the goalies before we move on to previewing tonight.
Perfect.
Because that has obviously been such a massive storyline of the way the Avs turned that over. But before we do that, I am going to remind you guys to go pay a visit up to our great friends up at 7 Brew Coffee up in Firestone, Colorado, their newest location here in Colorado. 7 Brew is a one-of-a-kind drive-through and walk-up experience with a fast and friendly crew that is waiting to serve you. From rich, bold coffees to refreshing energy drinks, smoothies, teas, and more, 7 Brew has you covered. With over 20,000 flavor combinations, there's a perfect drink for everyone. At 7 Brew, they believe in cultivating kindness with every cup, and their fully customizable menu is just the beginning. Before you hit the road, power up with 7 Brew in Firestone and experience the coffee revolution today. Also want to remind you guys about our great friends over at Landmark Lincoln, our longtime friends over at Landmark Lincoln. Go to landmarklincoln.com or stop in at the corner of Broadway and Bellevue and see why they have been the #1 Lincoln dealer in Colorado since 1911. Again, that's landmarklincoln.com and the all-new 2024 Lincoln Corsair GT plug-in hybrid. Let's put a bow on the first half of the season, Megan, with talking about the goaltenders. It was not only the story of really the Avs first half. This was a big story league-wide. For the first time in NHL history, an organization turned over their goalie room before Christmas. The Avs, you and I were covering Alexander Georgiev and Justus Onanen at training camp. And before Santa paid a visit to our houses, it was Mackenzie Blackwood, Scott Wedgwood. The fact that this is the first time in NHL history tells you what a big deal this is and the swing that Chris McFarland had to take to turn over not just his #1, which is already a big deal to do in season, but to say we need a new backup and a new #1.
Goaltending is such a gamble, too, as the Avs just realized in the Georgiev experiment. They needed to cash in on that one. The gamble had not paid off, and it didn't make sense for that relationship to move forward anymore. And if you look at the goals against from the start of the year until the trade, they had the third most goals allowed of any team. You look at after the trade, Mackenzie Blackwood specifically through now, they have the 6th fewest goals against of any team in the league. It's a pretty stark contrast. We've seen too what the goalie tandem save percentage has looked like since the trade. All the numbers point to a significant difference in goaltending. But in looking at our 10-game segment episode from recently, the team has been doing things well defensively over different parts of this season. And so it points to why this is such a huge emphasis to talk about goaltending as much as we continue to do, because there were things that the team was doing well that they weren't getting rewarded for. And there were things they needed to clean up. Still to this day, right? It's not a perfect team
Mm-hmm.
doing things perfectly in front of their goaltender every game, but there were a lot of things they were doing well and getting stronger and better at defensively in their own end, and they just weren't getting the goaltending to match. And so now they got the goaltending to match. They're still figuring some things out in terms of providing goal support as necessary. You know, the energy may be a little flat if you go back to the Montreal game and the start of the Buffalo game, but in an 82 game season, you really see a couple of things. You see, one, the importance of goaltending, and two, the strengths of this team. You're finally able to appreciate them a little bit more because the cloud of chaos that was goaltending to start this year has sort of moved away, and you get a clearer picture of what this team is as a result.
It was just, in my opinion, it was just such a distraction. It became just such a distraction on the ice. My guess would be off the ice as well. I'm sure that there were plenty of guys who were getting together for dinners or a drink or what have you, and we're probably sharing some frustrations about, can we get a save? I am in a moment here. I am going to play our conversation with Nathan McKinnon.
I love
this
it.
Morning. As brief as he wanted to make it. I want to play it because I do ultimately think that Nate said some interesting things. Nathan is he's my number one read between the lines guy. He will be very honest, but he'll sometimes do it in a way where you could tell this is a guy who's received PR training his entire life, is choosy about what he decides to say and not. But, I was trying to ask him about something that Jared Bednar had said. He feels that the confidence that the team has in the goaltenders has allowed the group to settle into the way that they want to play. And I just think that there was so much noise. Every time a puck went in, you're looking to the rafters. There was I said it on one of these shows here, there was no benefit of the doubt for Alexander Georgiev or even Onanen, really, at that point. They had played themselves into situations on this team where it's like, yeah, you don't get credit for the big save on the 2-on-1 because he gave up 2 of the first 3 shots and we're chasing this game 4-1. So yeah, you made a big stop on a 2-on-1, doesn't really matter. And I just thought that Nate's tone and answers today kind of just echoed like, yeah, we're not thinking about goaltending anymore, as where I bet it was dominating a lot of the conversation for a while.
I say play the Nate.
Let's play it. Nathan McKinnon this morning at Morning Skate.
It seems like the group has just really been able to settle into the season the way that you guys want to play over the last few weeks. Do you feel like you've noticed a change in the room maybe since the goalie switch over?
What do you mean?
Just maybe in terms of the attitude, and Jared was saying that the goalies are maybe giving you guys the confidence to be able to play that you want to play and just kind of settle into your style now that not have to worry about the injuries and all that.
I mean, yeah, we're getting a lot of saves, I guess, and that's always good. I think he's been the best goalie in the league since he's gotten here, so it's always good to have. Yeah.
Drouin came back in and he scored that big goal the other night, and I talked to him about just how hard he worked to get back and be able to be up at game speed. Seeing the struggles he's been through, how proud of him were you in that moment for just what he puts in?
Yeah, obviously he's been grinding all season. He's banged up a lot, which is unfortunate for him, and it was awesome. Obviously connecting there, him getting a huge goal was a lot of fun.
He marks the halfway point in the season, game 41. Where have you seen the biggest growth in this group from game 1 to this point?
I don't know. I thought actually we played pretty good all season, and now we're just getting a lot of saves. He's so big in there, and every game it's ours for the taking with him in net. So I think that's the biggest difference.
Thanks so much, Nate. Well, appreciate it, sir.
All right. So I actually really liked the response of, I think we've played really well all year. I think I do think that's true. I think there have been games and I think there's been moments and periods and things like that where they haven't necessarily played all that well. And I think there were times early in the season where the depth just really was an issue. But I don't think that this season, I don't think the 0-4 start reflected who the team was. I thought there were several stretches where they were playing better than the results they were getting, but they weren't getting any stops. I think he used the word saves about 10 times in that short exchange. Seems like it's helping.
Well, and my question doesn't ask about goaltending.
Right.
And he brings it up
My
unprompted.
question asked about goaltending. He said, what do you mean you didn't ask about goaltending? He talked about goaltending.
And I think, that's where Nate's holding us accountable. Like, don't give me a pointed or, a baiting question.
Right.
Let me drive this bus. But I do think back to when you asked me at the start of the show how maybe expectations have shifted or not around this team throughout the course of the season so far. And I think back to Scott Wedgwood early, talking about when you put on that jersey, you expect to win. For him to have recognized that so early into him being here points to an established winning culture in the room, despite the wins being pretty up and down through that point, right? Like when Scott Wedgwood was brought on board, they were still trying to settle the situation around what this team was going to be. They were still trying to string together wins consistently, and they were on that roller coaster. And Wedgwood was a huge piece in settling it, but Blackwood really has helped to send that home as well. And I think it's important to take note of that then, because McKinnon's saying, I think we've played pretty well all year. Obviously, like you say, you can pinpoint periods where maybe there were some things that troubled them, some boneheaded mistakes, but there's some reasons for those boneheaded mistakes that we've talked about on past shows. A lack of confidence, a lack of trust. And similarly, on the whole, we look at the penalty kill and how it's still not ranked very high in its totality on the season, but it has trended in the right direction because they've been doing a lot of the right things process-wise. And I think that's true of a lot of aspects of this team. You look at the PDO metrics throughout this year too, and they were on the worst end of bad luck. And so there were things in their shooting percentage and how they were creating that they just weren't being rewarded for. That is starting to translate a little bit more to goals, and the mistakes are becoming fewer. But it's not to say that they were riddled with mistakes from the jump. There are things that this team has done well and has tried to stay true to Bednar's identity because it's not new. And especially with the core that is here, that's not new. And so going back to your question that I stumbled through at the start of the show, I think game one, there was an expectation to win games, Stanley Cup aspirations. It's just been clouded by some of the chaos around the conversations with goaltending that we're starting to see a clearer picture, but it's not necessarily a new one.
I like that. I think that's a good way of putting it. And I do almost wonder if that's a little bit why, people in the chat are talking about what do you mean? I do almost wonder if that is a little bit of what Nathan McKinnon's perspective is like, no, I don't think that it's allowed us to settle in. To me, I kind of took away from that of like, no, we're not changing much. We're getting the saves now. And that's the difference is we felt we've been doing good things. We felt we've had good habits. We felt we've been working hard and that we just needed the saves to come around and that would make all the difference. That was a little bit of what I took away there of maybe why he seemed a little reluctant to maybe answer that at first.
And I think there's probably a pride in the tinge of defensiveness there too. Like, what do you mean? This has been a strong team all year. There've just been some things that have overshadowed some of the things that they've done well, and the results haven't always been there despite the process being good. And I like that he clearly has a sense of pride too, and maybe a defensiveness of how the team started this year, for example.
I think it all comes back around to what we were talking about with whether Nate wants to admit it or not, the goaltending move and the point that you made off the top of management having the confidence in this group to say, yes, we're going to go out and make a bold move. We're going to give up assets and we are going to be aggressive because we believe in this team.
We believe in this team past game 41.
Correct.
We believe in them right now, and we believe in them past 41.
I think that has just galvanized the group in a way that I think they needed that spark.
It took huge cojones because
big time.
It's a gamble. Again, we talked about how goaltending is a difficult position to fill in season, just generally around the deadline, you see it targeted. So before it, it's kind of crazy to pull that off.
Well, and to give yourself more time to work a new goalie in, go back through NHL history and find the last successful goaltender deadline acquisition, for like that current playoff run. You pay a lot and it typically doesn't work out. You give yourself time to settle in. Let's talk about tonight. We got another super chat here from Nix's best Avs coverage this year. You don't know what that means to us. There's the lights. Hit them again.
Thank you.
Super chat to Nick. Ooh, we got the money signs this time as well. Nick, thank you. That means the world to us. We work very hard every day to bring you guys the coverage that we would want on the other side of the camera.
The money just made me think too, not only do they get Mackenzie Blackwood, they extend him.
Yes.
And so he is a future option.
The following
in
dollar
that,
signs made Megan think of Blackwood's newest contract.
And just kind of giving some more credit to the front office for pulling that off in season. Get Mikko signed.
There you go. Let's talk about tonight. There's not really a lot to say. Big test for the Avs. It's a measuring stick game for them. As you're the defending champs coming in, this is a team that's well polished, does a lot of things well. They've got good depth, maybe not quite as deep as they were 6 months ago. But these are champions who know what to do and how to play the game. Paul Maurice is a very good coach, now finally a Stanley Cup champion, and it's a pretty good goalie on the other end as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a measuring stick game. I know the Florida Panthers have had kind of their version of a cup hangover season so far, but it's still not bad. And they're actually pretty identical in terms of points and wins to what the Avs have accomplished through this point. And so to your point, though, that Stanley Cup mentality does completely change things and makes for what I believe will be a tough matchup. I think their depth is still depthier than where the Avs are at right now. Going into tonight, the fourth line, it's still a little bit of a hodgepodge of guys that have very limited NHL experience. I think it's safe to say Juuso Parssinen, who they've just traded for, has the most NHL experience of anyone on that fourth line. And that's just a crazy thing to think about. But that being said, this is where the top guys can lead the charge, and they've gotten contributions from their back end in the form of Taves. Obviously, Makar continues to be a contributor. That's to be expected. But Josh Manson, stepping up in what was it the Buffalo game or was it back Utah?
For
Josh Manson.
Just coming back?
Yeah, no, he had a productive game. I'm just trying to think back to, he had 2 assists. It was the Middlestat Get Right game. He had 2 assists on 2 goals.
Was that Utah then?
It must
it was the
have
game before, because
been
the Middlestat Get Right game was the game before the Sabres, which was Utah.
All that to say, they've been getting contributions from different places in the lineup. Lehkonen sort of stepping up as well. An important note then that this can be from other places than just Nathan MacKinnon. I'd like to see Mikko Rantanen continue his point streak and have a big Mikko Rantanen game. Not to make the contract negotiations any more difficult, but there's a lot of positives going here. Mackenzie Blackwood on the heels of a strong performance against Montreal. Like, he's the reason the Avs had a fighting chance in that game.
Yeah.
He continues to be a difference maker for them in net. So they have got business to take care of their own. I thought the effort was a little bit sleepy in the final 35 of regulation in the Montreal game. And I'd like to see a team that has now the benefit of rest at home, getting home games in a home stand, sleeping in their own beds, to show up with some energy, especially seeing the impact that the crowd had on the team in the Buffalo game. I want to see them utilize the crowd and the excitement, because it's a good home crowd, okay?
Yeah.
Good fans. I want to see them leverage that alongside the rest and show up with energy. Like tonight, there's kind of no excuses from my perspective.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I granted some allowances in the Montreal game. I'm not really granting them allowances tonight.
The Montreal, what was disappointing about that one was that you had Montreal in the second night of a back-to-back. That should have been in a situation where you could take it to them a little bit. That was what I was disappointed with in that game. But I'm with you for tonight. Like, if this is a game that you like, if you're having a hard time getting up for this one, I don't know what to tell you. from a player perspective. Like, this is a game that you should want to get after. You want to beat the defending champs, right? That was one thing we talked about with Avs players a couple seasons ago, is once you win every night, every team wants to knock off the champs. You want to go in and you want to beat them, and you want to beat them handily and show that you can play with them and all that, so on and so forth. So yeah, this should be one that you get up for. I think a lot about in the 2022 season, the game against Florida in Colorado, where Andre Burakovsky has a hat trick. That I remember being the first game where I was like, whoa, all right, this Florida team is maybe in the right direction here. And what I remember most about that game was how well Sergei Bobrovsky played, and how if it wasn't for 3 outstanding plays and shots from Sergei Bobrovsky, the Avs are maybe, they're struggling to find a way out of that game. Your details got to be sharp. Your puck retrieval in the offensive zone has to be good. This is a team, in my opinion, that you've got to simplify. Pucks to the net, bodies in front, dig pucks out below the goal line. This Florida team, and then on the defensive side, you got to box out, win your battles, retrieve the puck, get it up off the glass and out of the zone as quick as possible. This Florida Panthers team makes their money on extended zone time, cycling below the goal line, and lanes to the net. If you allow them to establish the zone and just churn and churn and churn, they're going to get pucks to the front, and they're going to score goals, and they're going to wreak havoc. And, you got guys like Matt Tkachuk, who are going to make your life miserable all night long. Barkov, going to make you miserable all night long if you're not doing the little things, if your details aren't sharp, and you're not playing hard in front of both nets.
It's a great point. I thought it was funny this morning when Bednar talked about what he liked about Philibert. He said he's like Keaton Middleton as a forward. And I do think it's not purely coincidence that Olausson gets sent back in favor of Ty Philibert drawing in part because of that. I think Philibert will make the net front a little more difficult to play against, when he is defending in his own end. And I think that he's also going to pose more of a threat to Florida's net front. He's got a nose for the net. He kind of plays with blue collar habits despite having the top line opportunity in Loveland. And I think that's why even that small difference on a fourth line that is likely going to be sheltered, I think we're not going to see very much of him.
No.
But I do think that is the small advantage in looking to call up that player specifically because of the things that Florida does well. And that's where Colorado has been good in their own end with details, but some of the goals against, though much fewer now in this recent stretch, have been because they haven't defended their net very strongly. And I want to see that be a punishing place. I want to see that be an area of the ice that they make it difficult for Florida to be there. And I like that from Middleton. I like that from a Manson, but there's other players capable of doing that in different ways, even if they don't play the body specifically.
Well, and this is a team and a game that I'd like to see. Like, let's see playoff Casey Middlestat, because we just saw such a different level and intensity and physicality and engagement. Not that I think that he looks unengaged right now per se, but there was just such a different level that he took things to in the playoffs last year. And I think this is a perfect team for him to ramp that up. I think Casey's been a lot better in the last week plus. But this is another good game where it's a good opportunity for him to show out a little bit.
Montreal was a tough one for him analytically, personally. And so it's still a little up and down from him. I think coming out of the break, it's been better and I'm encouraged, but we talked about main character energy for Casey Middlestat. That's still the case. I want to see him play fearlessly. And I look at what Jonathan Drouin has done in returning, and there's so many similarities in what I think Casey is capable of and can excel in that I think he's just been a little hesitant to lean into. And so I want to see him abandon any fear in his game and get that line going with Ross Colton as well. Ross Colton analytically also didn't fare very well in the Montreal game. I think together those are two players that, like a Ross Colton who came back from injury, surged there for a second. I want to see his game get loud again too, together with Casey Middlestat, who I still think is trying to get himself out of a rut here.
Jonathan Drouin is expected to be in the lineup tonight oh my gosh. I'm going to start over. Jonathan Drouin is expected to be in the lineup tonight, despite not being at morning skate. Jared Bednar said it was just a maintenance. I think we can maybe come to expect that a little bit here as Jonathan Drouin ramps back up to game speed, still single-digit games played on the year for him. Megan, any last thoughts today before we jump out? You and I will be at the game tonight, then back at it on the pod tomorrow.
Not to be too dramatic, but I did want to talk about Gabriel Landeskog for a quick second. Back at morning skate, participating, drills. Emily Kaplan reported very recently that the reason Landeskog wasn't appearing consistently in practices is because his knee becomes too inflamed. I think that she is good for her information, wherever she gets it from.
I was just about to say, not to cut you off, but she has had a few Landeskog updates over the last 2 years that have all proven to be spot on.
This isn't pointed at Emily Kaplan at all. I just wanted to get your take in having that report come out pretty recently here, like a couple days back, and then seeing Landeskog at another morning skate. Where are you at with what you're seeing so far, and where to place your optimism?
And I'll say something on I'll say something here that we haven't really talked a lot about. I've got on some decent authority, pretty good authority, that Gabe Landeskog is skating much more than is publicly known. That there is a lot more on ice activity going on. I'll use the phrase behind locked doors with the curtains pulled. As far as where, when, what, all of that, I don't, I'm not going to sit here and dox Gabe Landeskog, but I've in conversations with some folks, sounds like Gabe is skating more maybe than we think. So when I see him out here at these morning skates, again, what's encouraging about it to me, Megan, is that he looks reactionary out there. It is not just go through, skate in the straight line, stop, do this, these movements. No, he's out there just kind of freewheeling. And that to me is what's encouraging. A report like that makes me nervous because to me, Megan, that is the type of stuff that stops a return. He's feeling good. He's doing what he needs to do. He's progressing through everything, but they can't stop this knee from ballooning up when he gets off the ice. And again, I don't know that. I'm going based off of Emily's reporting. So that is what makes me nervous is that, I remember talking with Darren Helm in the year after the Stanley Cup when he tried to one last hurrah. Darren Helm was going to go for it one more time. And he ended up dealing with the injury. Couldn't quite get back. We'd see him at practice. We'd see him at practice. He'd shed the non-contact for 2 practices. Then we'd see him back in it. Shed the non-contact. He'd take a morning skate. He'd play. Then he'd be out. And I remember at the end of the year going into the playoffs, I asked him, I said, does it being playoffs make it easier to play through the pain? And he looked at me and he said, it's not just pain that I'm trying to play through. Strength. He's trying to get his strength back. That is the thing that I worry about with Gabe Landeskog. And I get not him not being able to get the strength, but is something other than pain and other than mobility going to be something that holds him back here? Look, Evan was giving me a hard time because he was like, I'm done guessing. And I am too. But in my opinion, the last 2 morning skates have been the best that he's looked from what we have seen. Even in the instances where he ended up having a setback, it all looked very mechanical, all very deliberate. These last 2 skates, it's looked at a guy out there skating with the boys. So that's encouraging to me. But if he's dealing with a swelling issue, that might be something he just can't overcome. Lonzo Ball is on a, he's playing. He dunked for the first time last week. I think he's done it a couple times since. He's not really having any issues. He's on a game management plan. He's not playing every minute, every night. So what is that? What does that equate to at the NHL level or in the NHL? What does a return for Gabe Landeskog even look like? I think I'm encouraged by what we've seen, but I still just have so many questions.
Absolutely.
I just have so many questions. Where are you at with it?
Very similar. Like, I think where I place my optimism is kind of middle of the scale, but I don't feel the need to deduct optimism.
Yeah.
Even in the face of that report from Emily Kaplan recently, it's not really moved it back from where it was because of the progress being made before our eyes, but also since we get behind the scenes, that there's a lot of work being put into getting right on the ice away from public perception. And I like putting belief in things that I can't tangibly see. It's called faith.
Yeah.
I like faith.
Yeah.
So it's still in a pretty middle of the pack space though, but there's room for that to just become more hopeful unless there's a different development though, a different update that I think this isn't a morning skate type question for a Bednar, for people probably wondering, it's perfectly appropriate for us to follow up with Bednar on this. It wouldn't have been really appropriate today. They didn't practice yesterday. So we'll stay on top of this.
Yeah.
But it's fair game.
It's not like he's out there. Like, we're not seeing him at morning skate and thinking like, is he going tonight? You know what I mean? Like, it's not, he's skating with the team. That's what it is. What was I going to say on that? Man, you made a point there about Gabe.
Faith. Trust.
Oh, thank you. Here's the other thing too. And we've done this on this show before. Every time there's a video posted, there's a tweet that talks about it, we bring him up. There's a subset of commenters that say, give it up, stop, he's not coming back, he needs to retire, the Avs need to give up, they need to move on. We've said this before, but it's worth repeating. One, the Avs aren't just going to give up. As long as Gabe Landeskog is continuing to say, and the doctors are continuing to say, yes, there's a path, they're going to let him do it. Now, they might set some parameters in terms of decision-making relative to the salary cap, but they're not just going to tell him, sorry, we're not going to let you continue trying to rehab. Two, for all the people that say that Gabe Landeskog just needs to retire, that would be him punting on like almost $50 million and just saying, I don't need it. He's not going to do that.
Didn't I hear wife is expecting baby number 3?
Oh, did you?
I think I heard that.
Really?
Which, you know what? Family planning, why just not try when there's the option of trying?
Right.
Still in a window too where I think it's perfectly appropriate for him to be trying.
100%.
It's not like this has been dragged on. Like, he just had this procedure last year. The expected timeline to rehabilitate. Like,
it's 2020. It's early.
A year.
Yes.
Rehab expected. We're still in a window where this is a normal rehabilitation period for the nature of this injury, in my opinion. So you extend it past this season and there's still no clarity. I think it's fair to have questions.
Just because I know people are going to come after you because people just do that. We're technically beyond the regular recovery window for this surgery.
But it's not around professional athletes returning to the NHL.
That's where I'm going with that, is like, we're talking about an NHL player trying to return to the NHL after this surgery. This isn't just, I got this surgery and I want to be back to taking my dog on a jog around the neighborhood. There's very different parameters here.
It was May, right? May to May was kind of like the timeline, the year mark, and then May, June, July.
Well,
August,
and they said 12 to 18 months was the recovery time.
So we're around 20.
Correct. So we are beyond the typical window, but to the point that I think you're making, this is not a typical recovery process.
No, and 2 months past the expected timeline is still a perfectly appropriate window to
for sure
be evaluating the
for
situation.
Something like this.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to draw that because I knew someone was like, actually, it's 12 months. It's like, yeah, again, if you or I went and got the surgery, sure, it's 12 months. We're not trying to do what Gabe Landeskog is doing. And again, look, the other part is the NHL has guaranteed contracts. As long as Gabe Landeskog can prove that he is continuing to try to come back, why would he retire? Megan, if you could make $50 million or you could continue to try to rehab, like if you could not make $50 million or you could continue to try to rehab and make $50 million, what are you going to do?
I'm going to keep trying.
Right.
And again, going back to this appropriate timeline thing, he's not a bad person for wanting to see this through.
No.
Like, again, if we're talking years and this is being dragged out years and years and years past the point of the rehabilitation window, blah, blah, blah.
He got surgery 4 years ago.
Exactly.
Right.
Then you're like maybe morally gray. You're like, okay, that's not really fair to anybody involved, including yourself. But
Right.
this is still perfectly appropriate.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yep. I'm with you. It's just the process is going to play out. However, it's going to play out. When you see updates on Gabe Landeskog, you can greet him with optimism. You can greet him with pessimism. Doesn't matter. The updates on Gabe Landeskog are going to continue to roll in until he chooses to give up or he makes it back. And I don't see either of those things happening next week. You know what I mean? So if you see another video of him at morning skate next week, just know that this is all part of the process.
Yeah. It would be weirder for us not to report that.
Right. Right. Okay. Let's get out for today.
Let's done.
We got
It's done.
we got a game we're doing tonight. We'll be there bringing you guys everything from Ball Arena. She's Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. We got Thomas behind the glass today, and we got a whole crew of people helping out, making sure everything's working today. John, Mark, everyone making sure that you guys can see our faces. Thanks so much to everyone for hanging out. We will talk to you guys tonight, and we'll be back out on the pod tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Have a great week, everybody. See you later.
Bye.